Today we're going to talk about planning. We have a surprise visit from Aurora. She wanted to come and say hi to everybody. Say hi. Say hi. Apparently she doesn't want to say hi to everyone, but she's here. Okay, she's going back now. Alright, but so planning. I always do this. Whoop. Let's do this. So Alt Track. Scouting. Planning. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to say is this is how I like planning done, Alt Tracking and scouting. There are many different ways it's done. Different teams can do what's comfortable to them. In general, you know, if it works for your team, it probably works, right? I'll sort of talk about, in my opinion, what's done at a really high level and like what will allow you to do better as a team and like be able to have correct plans, okay? And like get more value out of each other and enable each other more, which I think is like an incredibly important concept, like enabling each other. Okay, so the other thing I'll also mention is if you try and do this, you need to break it up. If you're trying to like learn this and like, you know, like implement it, you need to break it up. Like first practice alt tracking, maybe then practice scouting, then practice planning. Don't do all of it like at once because it's just going to be too much. It's like too much. Okay, so this is the way I like to approach this. I like one person alt tracking. Then you have someone scout. And then after that you do a plan, and I'll talk about how that plan, like how plans work there. Okay. But this is sort of how it works. Get a different color. To go down. Whoops. Okay, here. So the biggest thing, right, in this plan, and we'll go into it, is the concept of being able to enable each other, right? And sort of essentially, if someone says something like, I want to look to grab, you essentially are able to enable them more. Like if someone says, I'm looking to grab, then you say, okay, I'm going to look to pulse bomb to maybe force lamp before. So then they have no lamp and then you can get value, right? Or maybe someone could say, I'm going to look to pulse bomb to force, or as Winston, I'm going to jump on their backline, jump on Zen, try and force trance, then you can grab. So you can enable each other so you can get more value. But the biggest thing and why this is difficult, I'll talk about it later, is because for people to enable other people, they need to understand how essentially, I'm not sure where my webcam is up over here. They need to understand how micro, like their individual actions, can affect macro, right? Or you can even say how micro affects other micro, right? So, and that's sort of a difficult concept, I'd say, right? And it can be a little tricky. And I just spelled micro wrong. Whoops. Micro. There we go. Okay. So the general way, right, this is done, and I'd say this is pretty much done in most tier 3 teams, right? There are 3 different ways like planning is done. 1, 2, 3. Okay, the first way is you normally have one shot caller, and this person just says everything. Says everything, right? And whatever he says is golden, and everyone just listens and you execute. So he says everything plan wise, and you guys just look to execute it. Now the problem with this is you're depending on one person to understand everything that's going on. And what I mean by that is understand, oh, the enemy team has these ultimates, we have these ultimates, so then we need to look to do this, or like we need to look to, you know, we look to hack maybe the Zarya first, so the Zarya can't grab, or pressure the Zarya, and then after that we can maybe look to you know, hard beat in and hard engage and kill the Zarya, and then then after that we need to live after because they might counter beat, right? So it could get a little complicated because they're thinking about how other people need to use their ults. They're thinking about how the enemy team is going to use their ults. They're also thinking about like the general team and their own role and how their own role affects. So thinking about like a lot of things, right? And it can get like really tricky, right? And people are able to do it, right? But the problem I have with this is you can do it, but you won't be able to say everything and you won't be able to include everyone. Nobody knows another person's role better than hopefully the person playing that role, The Winston shouldn't know that the person, the tracer's role better than the tracer, right? The Winston shouldn't know the Zen's role better than the Zen, right? So in general, having one person sort of shot call everything, right, can work, right? And it's done pretty much on tier 3 and below. But once you start getting like into higher and higher levels, it's reduced actually. It's not that done as much. So the second way is you have like one shot caller plus sort of the team. And what I mean is this shot caller will sort of say like the basic macro. So he'll say like, we're gonna look to grab first, and then maybe mid fight we'll look to beat, maybe. Then the Zarya player will say something along the lines of, I'm looking to grab like at a certain location, so like where maybe. The Zarya might even say who the Zarya is who the Zarya is looking to grab, right? And then maybe like the Lucio will say, obviously like when, right? Maybe the beat will happen and call the beat, right? So the shot caller gives a very basic overall macro, right? Where like there's ebb and flow maybe happening, right? And push and pull, or like a lot of mid fight. Like again, like we're gonna EMP first, right? And then they might counter EMP, so then we're gonna live and we're gonna beat, and then like we're gonna maybe push back in with grab again. Like the shot caller can do that, right? But then the person who has the ultimate is responsible for sort of saying, right, like when they want to use the ult, how they want to use it, who they want to go on, and giving more information on it. 1 second. There we go. Okay. Okay. So the last one, right? And this is the one again that most actually owl teams and I'd say like top contenders teams do, is just team planning. So what team planning is essentially anyone can make a plan. Anyone can make a plan, right? And people enable each other. And I'll go into this a little bit later, but like anyone can do anything. And I'll talk about how it's done and how it works, okay? But that's sort of like, the, in my opinion, higher level planning. Okay. So we're gonna be mainly focusing on this. Okay. This is sort of like when we talk about number 3, right? 2 is sort of obvious. Most people should understand how 1 works. So now let's sort of move into like the basics, right? Like in general, at a very high level. I'll just say it one more time. You alt track, you scout, and then you plan. I'll also mention later, sometimes you have to scout and alt track together because of certain reasons. Okay, so when an alt tracker is actually alt tracking, right? Like what should they be saying, right? And like how should an alt tracker, like when should they go? Like, like there's a lot of information about alt tracking that I think like people don't fully understand. Okay. And the first thing I'll say about alt tracking is a lot of it sort of also depends on your team and what the players are comfortable with and what the players like. Because the alt tracker is alt tracking for the players, not for me, not the coach or like for anyone else, right? The manager. The alt tracker is alt tracking for the players, so the players are able to listen, understand, and process the information and use it. So if the players prefer something, right, particular, probably should tell the alt tracker like, hey, I prefer you do it this way. Maybe it's easier for me to understand, or it's easier for me to process, right? So that you can get more value. But in general, right, this is what I like. What I like, okay, is I really don't like percentages because I think percentages are just not needed. So I like to say like they have it, like they have an alt, they don't have it, or they're close. Okay. The next thing, right? And close obviously your turret, so it's a mid fight. Enemy team's gonna get in a mid fight. The other thing that I sort of like, right? And a lot of teams I've talked to find it too like difficult, like sort of like cookie cutter, like it has to be this way. But the one thing I liked and what I used to do is I would always press tab when I alt tracked, and I'd always go left to right. And this way everyone could follow on my team. And it was always easy for me because I'll talk when to alt track, but like when I was alt tracking, I'd be able to do it like at the very start, and then I'd just say it, right? The other thing is, just in my opinion, again, it's better to just say like the have and the close. Do not say the don'ts, right? Like it makes it faster and cleaner. It's gonna it's hard to break that habit, right? But it'll make it faster and cleaner. Then the last thing I'll say uh, is when you're alt tracking, it's really important to emphasize the important alts. Sorry, my cat is decided to literally look at this chat. She's literally like in front of my monitor. Aurora, please move. I love you, but thank you. To emphasis the important alts. For example, enemy team has EMP, Grav, maybe Trance because you have Grav, right? Like the important alts your team knows, like, hey, they have EMP. Okay, we gotta think how we want to play this, right? Or they have 5 ultimates. Okay, immediately we gotta think. Okay, maybe do you want to trade backlines? Do we want to try to play really slow? Do we want to try and hard hit them and try and kill them before, right? But like emphasize important ultimates, right? That'll also help you. So these are the big things. Okay. Next part is when. Just one. Oops. Is when do you alt track? Now, the best time to actually alt track is when the fight is over. Common sense. When the yikes. When fight is over. But how do you define when the fight is over? I personally define when the fight is over when it's +4. That means it is a 6v2 situation, right? Like to me, if it's like a 2v2, right? Or like let's say a 4v2, right? This is not over. This is not over. If it's still a 5v2, it's still not over because the enemy team could get a kill because you could be low, you cannot have CDs. Enemy team could use ults here, right? And turn this. So it's still not over. So this is when, in my opinion, I think it's over. At least +4. If it's 6v1, great. Okay. But that's when I think it's over. So when the fight is over, right, you as an alt tracker in your head can start slowly thinking. You can start thinking, you can press tab and you can like not focus as much as healing and whatnot. You can start thinking in your head, okay, so they use this alt, they use this alt, they use this alt. Okay, so they have this and this and they're close to this. Then as soon as the fight is actually done, right, when it's actually done, then you can actually alt track, right? And you already know what to say because you've got a little extra time. And that helps speed up the scouting and planning. It gives you more time. It doesn't speed up, it gives you more time. The other thing I'd also say, right, sometimes alt trackers tunnel vision. Like, you know, it happens. You're doing a lot, right? The fight might have been crazy. You know, shit happens, right? So your team can say something like alt check, which is a command call. That basically, first of all, tells everyone to shut up. So we can listen to alt tracker, but also tells alt tracker to actually start alt tracking, right? That way you actually are consistent. And this also puts it on your team and not just your alt tracker to, there we go. It puts it on your team and not just your alt tracker to make sure you're alt tracking. The other thing I want to mention is sometimes, right, there are situations, and I'll sort of add it over here. My bad, I missed it. Oh. There are situations where maybe your alt tracker dies early. Or maybe it was just a crazy fight. And your alt tracker has like no idea what alts they have, right? And in these situations, it's really, really, really important that, in my opinion, you do the left to right strategy. Right? You literally press tab, and in an alt tracker, you say, do they have this? Do they have this? Do they have this? Do they have this? And your team responds with a simple yes or no. Right? And they could say close if needed. Right? And that way you just go through it really fast, right? And then your team's able to follow along, so hopefully they'll be able to help, right? And if you know once, you can like press tab and you can be like, okay, do they have rally? And then your team's like, yes, and like, okay, and then they're like, they don't have shatter because you know they don't have shatter, right? Do they have trance maybe? Like, again, I know it's not the correct order, but like that's sort of the concept, right? So you can also add it too, so it makes it even faster. Okay, so that's when you alt track, right? That's like an extreme situation. Now, what's really the next part that's really important that I don't think many teams actually do, which I find actually sort of crazy, but is to actually what are the players doing when alt tracking is happening, right? The whole purpose of alt tracking is to take the information and process it and actually listen, The problem I have with most teams is they don't actually process the information, listen, and actually use the information, right? So what should a team be doing when the alt track is happening? What they should be doing, right? And I sort of like try to make it like very basic and easy. The first thing is they should first understand what alts do they have. Alts does your team have?
Greetings.
Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing, which is again, this is what I think is very tricky and it's very hard. And I'll tell you right now, this takes time to understand and learn. Okay. Think how the enemy alts affect you and the team. And the way to break this down to make it even easier is this is how you should look at it. First, think about the macro. Oh, they have EMP. Oh, they could be looking to go first, or they could be looking to go second. But either way, they're going to do something with that EMP probably. Right? Oh, they have grab. Okay, like they could be looking to go first again with that grab. They could be maybe going second, but they're like, that's a really big important ultimate. We need to save like CDs, right? So macro wise, right? Like what is the tempo maybe the enemy team is going to go, and what tempo do you think you need to go, right? And then the positioning. What do you think is the positioning needed for your team? Right? And you don't even have to vocalize this, right? Maybe someone on your team can, but and we'll talk about it in planning, but you should be thinking about it. Now, the next thing, right? This is just a basic high level macro, what everyone should be doing is you think about what you should be doing as an individual. You need to be thinking about your own positioning, right? You need to be thinking this is for you. Why? Because this takes time. It takes time to set up. For example, let's say you're playing King's Row, right? And you're on defense on second point retake, and like they have card control, you're retaking. They're on brawl, and you're like, hey, they're on brawl. Oh, okay. I need to make sure I'm on high ground, right? Because they're on brawl. And also, other reason is like they've got grab, right? So if I'm on high ground and they try and grab us on high ground, it's even harder for them to follow up, right? So you start like thinking a little bit more, right? How can you position to make it harder for them and give yourself more value? Then after positioning, you think about alts, and you think about your ult. How can you get value out of your ult? And the last thing is CDs. Again, you or your. And and then how can you get value out of your CDs? For example, like they're gonna EMP, maybe as Zen or maybe as Brig, you hide away so you can look to like Pax people. Zarya, maybe you bait your Reinhardt and then you look to bubble, and you hide yourself and play a corner and you look to bubble the Rein, or if they go in backline, you can bubble the backline, right? So you sort of need to understand sort of what's actually happening when an alt track's happening, and sort of like how to actually process this information and use it. Okay. Now, we move into scouting. Drink some water here. Aurora is chilling and looking out the window. Okay. So now we sort of talked about like alt tracking, right? Sort of like, who does it? Like, well, I actually didn't bring up who does it, but all I'm going to say for who does it is like, wait. I hope this doesn't cancel anything. Okay, cool. All I'm going to say about who is normally like the person who's more comfortable. Like all I'm going to say, it's about comfort. Okay. It's comfort, and like obviously there are some roles that just make it easier. Right? So like main support, main tank, sometimes, right? But I've seen it on off tank, I've seen it even on DPS, as weird as that sounds. But it, what's comfortable and like what's an easy role as well. Okay, but yeah, now moving into scouting. Let's go down here. Okay, so who scouts? So the biggest thing about scouting is I'm gonna say it depends on a few different like attributes again. You want someone who is mobile. You want someone who like won't take a lot of poke, so can maybe like play the environment or like play far away and see. Like example, Pharah Echo, play far away, won't take a lot of poke, right? Or maybe like Tracer or Genji. So won't take a lot of poke. You want someone who can maybe third person if possible. Third person scouting. And I'll just write the names down here. Like Ryan, you can do it with your shield, and obviously Ball can do it, and there might be some more that I can't think on top of my head. And the other thing that's really important, right, is someone who you don't want to give your positioning away. You don't, or you don't mind giving your positioning away. Aurora, move. Go. You don't mind giving your positioning up. Don't mind giving positioning. For example, right? Doomfist. If you were playing Doomfist, you don't want your Doom scouting. Why? Because if they know what the Doomfist is, they're gonna pressure him out and he can't get value, right? If you're maybe playing Tracer and you want your Tracer to get value with the Ball Slam, right? You don't want your Tracer scouting because then your Tracer is gonna get forced out, right? I mean, you could have it if you really need to, right? But if you have Ball, your Ball can third person scout, right? So like depends on the composition. And I'll give some like very basic examples. So you have like Ryan, you can have Ball, you can have Diva, you can have Echo, have Pharah, you can have Lucio, Mercy actually. So those are some basic ones I just thought on top of my head, right? That are all sort of mobile and you don't really mind normally. Again, based off the composition, you don't mind if the enemy team sees you. Obviously, maybe you're looking for a barrage play, so Pharah doesn't want to scout anymore. Pharah wants to hide, right? So then someone else is gonna scout. You have those situations as well, right? Like Diva needs to look for like maybe a peel bomb or something. It needs to hide, and the enemy team's gonna EMP, and then you're gonna peel bomb or something. So, or Echo wants to like look to go for really aggressive trade backline play and can't scout. So in that situation, you're gonna have to have someone else who does it. But as long as that's communicated, right, you will be fine. Okay. Next thing is when does scouting happen, right? So we talked about, and I mentioned earlier that scouting it normally happens after the ult tracking. But the problem with this is when you play really good teams, they will like start like pushing you or start like rotating and like getting ready to hit you maybe before your ult tracking is done. So sometimes your scouting plus ult tracking happens together. And when this happens, you need to be sort of soft. You need to be softer than the ult tracking. So the team hears this over the scouting, but can still sort of hear both. You need to understand sort of the tone of voice, right? Your tone of voice has to be sort of good. Okay, the other thing is you want to try and do it as early as possible. The reasoning is because again, when the whole purpose of scouting is so that you can plan. But more than just planning, it's also just so you can set up. And sometimes it takes time to like reposition. So after all tracking's done, right, and you see them like as early as you see them, right, try and like call it early, right, so you can sort of like have your team know where they need to go. Oops. Okay. Now, last thing for scouting. Who should you be scouting? Now, this might sound really like dumb, but you don't need to scout everyone on the enemy team. Okay? Like that's just ridiculous. You're just feeding like way too much information to your team and it's like cluttering comps. So how I'll explain this is compositions are designed a certain way. Most comps have what's called a core. I'll talk about that in a second, right? Some comps have like a front line and a back line. Some comps have like a lot of flankers. Okay. So the way I'm gonna first explain this is what a core is. A core is made like sort of like the center or like the main part of the team. For example, if you're running a comp like uh, Ryan, Diva, Tracer, Echo, Lucio, BAP, for instance, right? Your core is going to be this because these guys are always together and these guys are flankers and they go do off their own thing, right? The core is sort of the people that are together and they sort of move together and your team can maybe back up to it, help them, and whatnot. An example of frontline backline is a meta that we played a little bit ago, which would be, let's use a different color, pink. So ball, tracer, echo, right? That's the front line. You could maybe classify echo as backline, just depends how you sort of want to play it. But then your definite backline would be like Zarya, Brig, and then maybe Ana or Zend, whatever you play, right? That's your backline. So now what I'm getting at, right, is how you can scout this is you can say something along the lines of their core is going up main and then their tracer's flanking left and their echo's flanking right. Instead of saying the Ryan's main, their Diva's main, their Velucio's main, that's just ridiculous, right? If the Ryan's coming main, I'm almost like guaranteed that like BAP's behind the Ryan. Because if the BAP's not behind the Ryan, that Ryan's getting really low shield. Unless that maybe BAP has square and he's gonna go for a flank square, which again, pretty high level, which maybe could happen. Maybe, right? But and like you can go into like understanding those intricacies too if you really want to with alts and scouting as a scouter. So make sure you're scouting people that have important ultimates and like taking that into account. So that's definitely important. I'll add that over here. Where's blue? Important alts, right? So that's sort of how like the core works, right? And frontline, backlines, like their backlines, going through like maybe like Busan drums, their backlines going through pillar and coming to point, and their front lines rotating right and looking to flank us, right? Pretty straightforward. Sometimes their flankers are separate, and you just need to keep track of flankers because Tracer can hit your ball, Doomfist is important, Reaper can flank and just one tap you. So you need to make sure you know where flankers are, and flankers. Hopefully, you should know that category is. Okay. But now we're moving on to the last part of this. Last part is the planning. Okay. This is like the more difficult one, right? So the way I'm gonna approach this, right, is I'm gonna sort of again go back and sort of say like how you should think about it, right? You need to understand understand your alts, like your team's alts. Then you need to understand enemies alts. The enemy teams. Then, right, you need to then think from there, right? If scouting info is important, maybe it'll help, right? Because it'll get position and stuff. But like, I'm not gonna like fully do this. Like, you can use that too. But then after that, then you make your plan. So you think, okay, this is what we have. This is what the enemy team has. The enemy team is maybe going to do this, so we should look to do this, right? The enemy team is, have these ultimates that are rotating this way. They looks like they want to play really slow. Maybe we can look to hit them on the rotation and play really fast. Okay, so now that's sort of the general like idea. Now, in a plan, this is what's the important part of plans. There is a who, there is a where, and there is a what. The who is, who are you going on? Where are you going? Where is the location of your engage? You like hitting them because they're hitting, or like maybe setting up. right? Like where were you hitting them? If you're mobile people, if you're brawl, maybe where are you setting up and then you're looking to hit, like, and then looking to, and then what are you doing? And this is where like this sort of like even more comes in, like this part, right? Where it's like, okay, we're looking to, you know, they're maybe looking to do this, like, they're going to beat aggro. We're gonna kite, then we're gonna push back in with our beat, and then if that fails, right, then you know we can maybe use grab or something. Okay, so that's sort of the what, right? And again, I'll talk about who's saying this in a second. So notice how there's sort of like this thing where it's like okay, if they do this, we do this, and you know if this happens, then this happens, right? So what you actually end up happening here is you get what I like to call if statements. The inner computer science major in me is very happy when I hear this, right? But if statements allow you to deal with different things, right? So if they do this, we can do this. And immediately, like if they beat first, right, we can kite and then we can do go aggro. And immediately everyone's on the same page if they do that. Okay? The biggest thing I want to emphasize with if statements is don't just play for the enemy team. When you start saying, "Oh, if they do this, then we can do that," you're immediately thinking like you're always thinking like, you know, that they could set, like they're gonna set tempo. Sometimes you might just say, "Hey guys, I want to go in first with Nanoblade and kill them all." The same way you could also say, you know, I want our Winston to like jump in, try and force resources, and we kite, and then we Nanoblade, right? Or like if they beat aggro, right, we kite and then we Nanoblade, right? But sometimes you might say, let's just Nanoblade first, right? So don't get caught up in this all the time, this concept of like, oh, we need to go second, or we need to always, you know, think. We always need to think about the enemy team, right? Like it's good, right? 1 second about the enemy. It's good, but not all the time. The really, really important times, right, is especially when they have a lot of ults. When it's like a lot of ults versus a lot of ults, a lot of ults versus a lot of ults, right? Those fights get really intricate and really long. That's when it starts. It's really good to start thinking about like the longer fight. Like if this happens right first, then we can do this, and then in mid fight you can maybe do this, and then we can stabilize in this area, right? Rough if you to go first. So you can say like, we're looking to go first here, but if they beat, then we can do this. So you can cover both statements, right? By using, you want to go first here, but if it fails, then we're going to maybe go second. We're going to kite, we're live, and they'll push back in. Hopefully this makes sense. It's like really, really, really important. Okay. Now the next part of this is the fact of when you're playing a comp, and hopefully most of you have like recognized this, right, from the ball comp, right, where I just talked about before about the concept of like a frontline backline situation. Sometimes you have two different sets of team people doing different things, right? Sometimes your backline may want to do something, and then your frontline also might want to do something. Obviously, yes, they're somewhat related, but maybe they're doing different things, right? So, for example, I'll keep this very simple. Let's say, you know, you have this, right? And this is maybe like for your core, right? So you have a, I'm not gonna go too much into it, but you have a who, what, where, for like what your core is doing. For example, let's say you're playing brawl with like flank with like a flank. Let's say you're playing this comp. So you're playing Orion, Diva, McCree, Tracer, Lucio, Bap, right? So you've got your core over here, right? And they've got a who, what, where, right? And they're doing a plan. But then your Tracer obviously isn't part of that core. Your Tracer is probably gonna do something else, right? So your Tracer will probably have some other plan, so like a solo plan. So your Tracer will also have a who, a what, and a where. right? Where, you know, your core says, okay, we're gonna look to push really hard and we're gonna go into them. Tracer's gonna say, okay, I'm gonna side flank. I'm gonna look try and pressure the BAP, try and like, you know, force lamp, or maybe they have Moira, try and force fade really early. Then we, you know, they don't have fade. Maybe we can kill the Moira, or I'm gonna split focus, right? So you can have a core plan and you can have a solo plan, right? So you can have sort of two things still happening, right? And your team should still your team should understand how both of those sort of correlate together, and because they still enable each other, right? If you understand, there's still a connection, right? They sort of combined, right? This person's doing something, right? But it still somehow helps this person. This group is doing something, but it helps this person. Okay. Now, so this should hopefully give like a basic understanding of sort of like, you know, what you should be like saying when you're planning, right? Like you should be saying who we're going on, where are we going on, where are we setting up, like where are we looking to engage on, what are we doing, right? Like if they do this and we do that, otherwise we're gonna look to like maybe hit them first. And then your tracer might say, you know, something separate. Maybe your Doom might say something separate. Your Reaper might say something separate. So yeah. Now, the next one, the big one, right? Is who plans. Obviously, yes, the solo thing. Like if you have a solo person, right? Like you know, that person can do it, right? Like so, if you have like a solo flanker, solo flanker, that person can like make a plan and like go do that, right? But the core, or let's say you have a team that just like all plays together, like you know, like you're playing Brawl or something. So like, who plans in like your 6-man group? Your 6 people. Who does it? And this is where stuff gets difficult and like more where some people have to be patient. People who are very talkative have to learn to give room. People who aren't talkative have to learn to speak up a bit more, which is why this isn't done in like, you know, lower than in tier 3 and below. Because when you're like at lower, you know, SR and whatnot, some people just don't talk. Some people talk a lot and they use it. When you start getting higher SR, you have most people talk on the team, right? So you use that information. So now what I'm getting at is your who talks is based off a few things. It's based off the macro impact in the comp. Then the next thing, other way of also looking at this maybe is like the early fight carry. I'll give examples in a second. Or like a person with a really important ult. Okay. So a person of like, so let's say you're playing ball comp, right? Your ball comp, like the sort of quote unquote the early carry, I'd maybe say, right, is like the ball slam, right? Like that ball is like setting up the early fight, at least for him in the front line, and then the you know the back line follows up on it eventually, right? So the ball would in brawl, right? The early carry is probably like the Reinhardt, right? Because he does a ton of damage, leads the team, rotations, like everything like that. I will also talk about rotations. I will hopefully not forget that. But yes, right? So like that's like important. Then a person with a really important ultimate. For example, you have like EMP or you have Grav. If you have EMP or Grav, right? Probably the Sombra should start saying like, okay, I have EMP. You know, I want to look to EMP them first. I want to EMP them, you know, on this bridge, and I'm going to look to EMP the Zarya, and we can kill the Zarya. Or and then the person can say, if they look, if they engage on us, or if they beat engage or something, then we'll look to kite for a second. Then I'll EMP them, and we push hard, right? Or if they look to trance engage, then we'll kite, and then right after trance is over, I'll EMP. Something like that, right? And then people can add on to that, right? This is the enabling part. Then like people can say, okay, yeah, right, sure. I'm gonna position a little bit far back. Make sure you carry my LOS. When you EMP, I'll look for an anti. And then maybe someone else could say like, okay, all right, just in case of trance, I'm gonna save bubbles so we can live maybe through that. So I'll bubble you, Ryan, so you don't get like run over, right? So like people enable each other to which the person sort of made that plan, so that plan gets even more value. Okay, so that's the enable aspect of this. Okay. The other thing, so when I start saying, oh, person with the most impact in a comp or person with the most important ultimate, right? I guarantee you when you start trying this, you're going to have like 3 people start talking at the same time. 100%. You might have a situation where your Sombra has EMP and your Zarya's got grab and they both talk at the same time. So the golden rule, right? You learn when you're growing up. If someone says something, you listen. You don't talk over them, right? You listen. So if someone says something first, you listen. And that's the plan. And obviously, yes, they could plan wrong, right? You could disagree. Sure, if you really, really, really need to, because like it's a really important point, sure, you could say like, no, but I really want to do this, and then like people will hopefully understand. But especially because if it's a scrim, right? Let the person make a mistake. Let them learn from their mistake. The only way a team gets better is if individuals understand how to get better at their role and understand how their role affects the team's macro versus the enemy team. So they understand their impact and how they can like get more value from their impact. And the like if when they're planning, right, that's sort of them thinking how like how they can get impacted in like in a situation with an ultimate or whatnot. So if they're wrong in that situation, that's like a macro or like that is like a macro problem or a micro to macro problem, which is like really important for that person to understand later, right? So that's a good conversation to have later. So in general, if someone says something first, listen, let the person plan. You disagree, write it down, talk about it after. Okay, so first listen, plan. Okay, the next thing, right, is, and I sort of already sort of mentioned this, but anyone can sort of plan. Anyone on your team can plan. With the specific situations where you obviously give preference to these 2 things first. They have like more priority, I'd say. Okay. And then again, I'm just gonna say it again, is please listen to each other. Even if you don't agree and you listen and you go and you're all on the same page and you execute it, the chance of you getting that plan right, the plan working, even if it's macro wrong, like it's just like it just doesn't make much sense, but you're all on the same page and you execute it together, you'll have a much higher percent, okay, of actually winning that fight. Then your guys aren't on the same page and you guys have like you're just doing something random. If you're on the same page, because Overwatch is a team-based game, right, you will probably win more, like in general. Okay. The thing I want to quickly add, right, is rotations. Obviously, rotations need to be talked about, and rotations can be mentioned by the person with the like the macro like importance, right? So in most situations, maybe like Orion, right? You're playing Brawl. But in other situations, maybe you're playing dive, right? It could be, someone else, right? Your backline could maybe say like, maybe your backline's going one way, your Winston's going to flank, your flankers are also going different directions. So your backline could say like, I want to rotate here, right? So you can include the rotation or where you want to rotate or how you want to play, right? As part of the plan in the what and the where, okay? But in general, right? Like also remember that like when you're sort of approaching these, right? Like your Ryan, when you're playing Brawl, right? Rotations are probably going to go more to your Ryan, right? When you're playing certain compositions, right? Certain people more of a hierarchy because it makes a little bit more sense for them to call it because it's easier. The last thing, I actually forgot about this, but it's in my notes. The last thing is neutrals. This planning and alt tracking and stuff, right? Alt tracking, you can't alt track in neutrals. Neutrals are the first fight, right? So there's no alts. Does that mean you don't plan in neutrals or you don't say anything in neutrals? And that's wrong. You should still be saying something in neutrals. In neutrals, you can still scout and you can still have a sort of plan, right? You can say, oh, they're on, they're on, man, blanking. They're on like Winston or like they're on double bubble. They're on double bubble, right? And like let's say you're on like ball comp, right? So they're on double bubble. We need to look to like punish this Winston as hard as we can, right? Or we need to look to like play really slow and poke them out. Play really slow with our ball comp and like poke them out really hard because we know that if we engage on them, your team knows that you're just not going to win, right? Maybe you're playing on like Legion Control Center, it's Brawl Mirror, right? And you notice like you guys have a Moira, so you guys want to play fast. The enemy team has a BAP, right? So you're like, oh, they have a BAP. We need to play fast. We need to. We need to do something to try and force lamp, stabilize, and then push hard in. Otherwise, we just lose because we're just gonna get poked out from the BAP. And maybe because they have a BAP, maybe they have like a Kree too, right? And you have a Reaper, right? So like you can scouting can give like sort of like heroes that'll like tell you maybe your tempo you need to play, or maybe maybe you guys need to play like angles, which is sort of gets into like positioning. Which is angles or like together, right? So based on that scouting, right? It can like but the heroes can tell you a lot of stuff, right? And then you can sort of like say, oh, we need to play angles, and immediately you guys, oh, okay, we need to play angles. This is how we should go about it. Okay, actually, the last thing. Okay, this is actually the last thing. I promise. How do you know you're doing good? How do you know you're actually like accomplishing, like you're actually planning, you're alt tracking, right? You're scouting, right? Like, how do you know? Like how do you know you're doing this? How do you know you're doing well? And a very basic like stat way to look at it, because I'm in actually a stats class right now and I hate it, but it's interesting. I've done some data science stuff, but you can do this. You can count how many times your team planned. And this is in general. This is you had some type of plan. It could have been shit. It could have not included, the who, what, where, but you had a plan. You had something, right? It's just a general plan. Next thing, same thing. Count how many times your team didn't plan, right? Then after that, count how many times your team planned well. Okay. Now, or correctly is another way of saying it. And like the way to like think about like what's well and what's good. Did you alt track? Did you scout? Oops. Did you do like an actual plan with the who, what, where, right? The W's. Um, did you do that, right? And then like also the plan, did you sort of like enable each other? So if you did that, right, that's great. Like that's a good plan. Now it could be macro wrong. It could like the plan can make zero sense. Your alt tracking could have been bad, right? But like you did everything that was needed, right? And now the way to look at this now is you can now look back and say, okay, well, if you planned good, right, and you're getting a fight win, that's obviously good, right? But let's say you planned good and your fight's lost. This is where you're curious. These are the things I'll use. These are the things that you want to look at and understand what went wrong. Was it you just got outplayed? Like you legitimately like just got outplayed like mechanically? Was it your macro in your plan was just terrible? Was it your alt tracking was wrong? Was it oh man, there's one I had, it was really good. Oh, what was it like really close? So it doesn't really matter? Maybe like it was really close, so like and it was going to be a close, so it doesn't matter as much. But the ones you really care about here is did someone mess up the macro? Did someone mess out like the alt tracking? Right? Because this needs to be good, right? And that's really, 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 really important. Still something else I'm forgetting. Oh man. Give me 1 minute to think about it really fast. Oh, yes. Execution. Did you actually execute your plan? This is the other thing. You could have a good plan, but did you actually do it? Did you actually execute it? You have a great plan, right? We're gonna do this. So yeah, if they do this, and then we're gonna kite. We want to look, or we want to look to go first. But if they beat first, then we're gonna kite, and then we're gonna push back in. And if that doesn't work, then we're gonna mid fight do this, right? You have a great plan. But if you don't execute it correctly, that's also something you have to work on, and that's a different topic, right? So these are sort of things that still might happen if you've got good planning, and you need to make sure that you go through it. Like your macro is bad, okay? Maybe you need to review your macro. Alt tracking is bad. Okay, you just need to work on your alt tracking. Execution, well, that's going to need teamwork, right? And sort of understand why was it not executed correctly. Okay. So that's it. Sorry, it went a little long, a little tired, but hopefully that should give a very clear and good understanding into actually how to alt track, scout, plan at a pretty high level, right? And what to understand if something goes wrong, right? And what to do from there. So again, the thing I'll always mention that I think people struggle with and what individuals need to work on is understanding how to enable others. How your micro can affect someone else's micro, or how your micro can affect your team. This is difficult because this requires thinking, right? And also, that's just enabling your team. Then how to also disable the enemy team, right? With your own micro.